Okay, so I'm here today with Sean Zhao from Micro-Dyn, who I want to talk to a little bit about actuaries as entrepreneurs. I think Sean has a very interesting and a bit different history as an entrepreneur. But before we get into that, I don't think actuaries do enough in this area, entrepreneurship and innovation. And it's something that I've been trying to encourage over the years. And do you have an opinion on that, Sean?
Well, absolutely, Ian. I think you and I, we're both in the health world, right? And in the health world, specifically, in the last few years, I found that the value of the actuarial skill set, both the technical and the non-technical, being the business side of things, are frankly just increasingly more valuable to the startup world and to investors. So just purely from that perspective, I do think actuaries are really, really well positioned to be entrepreneurial, however you want to define that term, and there's many ways you can define that term. So I do think there is a great opportunity for actuaries to pursue entrepreneurship in many different ways, and at least in the health world, I think they're actually extremely well positioned to do so.
I think there's a couple of barriers to actuaries becoming entrepreneurs, I think. One of them is the fact that we have very good jobs working for corporations, and we're very highly paid relatively. So it's a very difficult step, I think, for somebody to step away from the corporate world into an entrepreneurial role where you may not be making a lot of money immediately. You have the
Yes.
possibility of some later on. But what was it? Did you have a corporate job at one point before you stepped into the entrepreneurial world?
I did, and maybe this might be a good opportunity to share a little bit about my background. I started as a traditional health actuary at Mercer and did that for about 5 years. And after I got my FSA, transitioned to McKinsey and Company, where I worked primarily as a general management consultant. So I was there for the majority of my career to date, actually, working with health plans, governments, providers, did a lot of Medicare and Medicaid work. So it was certainly one of those jobs that you can say it was difficult to step away from for sure. And I would say I think there's that component to it, but there's also a lot of other confounding factors, including the fact that I think there just isn't as much of a kind of a tried and true and established infrastructure or framework for actuaries like us to be entrepreneurial, like the way there is for other professions, right? Physicians, for example, living in New York City here, there is a huge physician entrepreneur network supported by VCs and businesses and all sorts of organizations. And I don't see the same for actuaries. So yeah, I do think the risk, the opportunity cost is certainly one big component, but there are also a lot of other factors to consider here too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. My background as well was management consulting, and maybe there's something more accurate to try management consulting. I was at Pricewaterhouse and PricewaterhouseCoopers for 10 years and
Yeah.
learned a great deal about client management, but also infrastructure, operations, implementation of software, which I think was a very different kind of job, a different kind of skill to the typical actuarial skill. But one of the things that I've found, and we'll get back to your story in a minute, but the idea that there should be more resources for actuaries, like there are, I agree with you that I do a lot of work with entrepreneurial clinicians, and there's huge networks, and there's private equity and VC that support them. We don't see the same thing with actuaries, and one of the things I've been promoting with my candidacy for the board at the SOA is the idea of an actuarial venture capital fund, maybe run by the SOA, maybe run on the outside of the SOA, probably would have to be outside the SOA because it's not something the SOA necessarily has skills for, but providing both the financing opportunity, but also the sort of support that you need with the resources if you're going to step out into a job like this. Do you think that that would be helpful and would be encourage more entrepreneurship?
Yeah, frankly, I think that would be one of the best ways the SOA could innovate, right? And I think, I do agree with you that as far as funding goes, most of that, if not all of that, may need to come from outside investors, because that's, for all intents and purposes, not necessarily the core competency of the SOA, but what the SOA can provide is a platform and a network, right, for actuaries who want to be entrepreneurial, whether by themselves or partnering with other actuaries or other non-actuaries to pursue that path, right? We all have our day jobs, and the SOA conferences is one of the best kind of time for folks like us to get together. So in terms of the ways that the SOA can support entrepreneurship and for actuaries, I think that's a phenomenal idea. And frankly, from an investor perspective, that also makes a lot of sense, as I can speak from personal experience that I know that investors are valuing kind of the actuarial skill set more and more, particularly in the health tech space.
I think that a lot of entrepreneurs come up with an idea. I definitely see this amongst the clinician community, because they often are inventing devices or programs or something like this, and then they go out and look for funding. But I think your story is the reverse of that. Tell us more about how you became an entrepreneur after McKinsey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've always known that I want to do something a little bit independent, and it was really, all about timing. A former colleague of mine and friend from McKinsey, Steve, he and I found a operator-led private equity firm called the Brighton Group, based out of the Washington, D.C. area, who were looking to find future CEOs and partnered set CEOs with companies that they were looking to acquire. So we ended up partnering with them on a pretty broad healthcare thesis. And as luck would have it, about a year and a half ago, we acquired Micro-Dyn, which is a claims grouping and pricing software business and very actuarial in nature. So in that sense, it's brought me all the way back home. And today I operate as the CEO and co-chairman at Micro-Dyn. We're privileged to serve over 240 end customers in the healthcare space today. But that journey, I think, just going back to your point earlier on, was there's very little, if any, right, established guidance around how to really go pursue a path like this. It was very much trial and error. Talked to many VCs, PEs, investors, startups, and really came close to doing many different things at different times before ultimately landing on something like this, which to me was, to use actuary talk a little bit, right, was a little bit less risky in that we're acquiring a business that's already doing well. So our job is to take it from good to great, versus, from, if I were to found my company, right, I'm trying to go from 0 to 100, so to speak, right? So that type of risk profile, and going back to your very first point about having well-paying jobs, right? This type of risk also provides a lot milder downside risk relative to throwing everything off and maybe not taking a salary, or maybe taking a very, very low salary for 1, 2, or many years, and kind of looking for that reward down the line. That was the level of risk that I ultimately felt comfortable with kind of my financial responsibility to my family, and kind of trading off really mostly what I consider upside risk versus a place like a consulting firm, as you can relate with PwC, right, of being a longtime partner, as opposed to trading off downside risk of earning lower or no salary.
Upside opportunity. That's yes. What we're all interested in. Upside opportunity.
Exactly.
But I'll throw out one tip. This is not for you. This is for the general audience. That one thing I've discovered is that there were several years when I had my previous company when I didn't take a salary, and come to the age at which I get my Social Security pension, I discover that there are some years in my Social Security record at zero, which means I don't get the full Social Security amount. So if you're thinking of becoming an entrepreneur, it's worth remembering that you want some salary during those years.
Or at least 15 good years, as I believe that's the rule.
Tell us more about what Micro-Dyn actually does. You said it's grouping software. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, ultimately, our mission is to simplify payments in healthcare, right? We focus on Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements for primarily facilities. So think about hospital, inpatient, and outpatient payments. So when a health plan is processing a claim from a hospital, they rely on a software like us to determine what the appropriate reimbursement amount ought to be under Medicare, Medicare Advantage. One term that folks may be familiar with is the prospective payment system under CMS. So we are the software that helps adjudication of claims by making sure the claims has got the right edits on it, to make sure that the appropriate DRGs are grouped, and ultimately the appropriate reimbursement amount is assigned based on a whole host of factors, including hospital wage indexes, right, exclusions, exceptions, things like that. So in many ways, to non-actuaries and perhaps non-healthcare actuaries, the way I explain is we're kind of like a tax software in some ways for healthcare, where the tax code is out there, right? Anybody can access it, but nobody's doing their personal income taxes by hand, right? They rely on a software, whether it's TurboTax or if it's an accountant, the accountant's got their own software, right? We play the same role, with the major difference being that the rules of the road change on a quarterly basis. So every quarter, the rules are updated, and our mission is to make sure that we stay ahead of those updates to make sure reimbursements are appropriate and accurate.
So in my simplistic world, you're taking lines of claims submitted by a hospital, for example, and grouping them into a DRG.
That's correct.
In my simplistic world.
And that doesn't sound that simple.
No, I understand exactly. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So how are things going, and how are you finding the entrepreneurial life compared with McKinsey?
Well, it is very, very different. I think I'm one that really loved my experience at McKinsey, and looking back, I'm still in touch with many colleagues there. I certainly wouldn't be where I am without the McKinsey experience, for sure. Doing what I'm doing now, I honestly, I can't imagine doing anything different. Is kind of the answer here. To be honest, I wake up every day excited to get the day started, and ultimately it's the accountability, right? Our company, thankfully, is going very well. I have a great relationship with my business partner, Steve, and we have a really awesome and growing team across engineering, sales, product, and other functions. So it's really kind of the ultimate accountability of you're the one making the decisions, and you need to kind of bear the responsibilities, good and bad, right? Now, of course, there's always luck, good luck, bad luck with as there is with everything. But I'm very grateful for the fact that kind of the decisions and efforts that I put in are kind of directly proved right through the results of the company, hopefully both the near term and long term.
That is one thing I think when you are an entrepreneur is you're responsible ultimately for everything. You have to have, you gain very quickly knowledge about everything, ranging from marketing, sales, all the way through to engineering, if you're going to keep succeeding, I think. And that's been a great part of the journey for me, is how much I've learned about all these things that aren't part of the typical actuarial toolkit.
Yes, and to that point, I think one thing I say to people who I talk to who are thinking about doing something entrepreneurial, one thing I always say to them is, remember that you don't necessarily have to do it alone, right? I think actuaries have a terrific edge, particularly in healthcare, again, where they understand the granular economics of healthcare better than almost anybody. And as you know, Ian, the health tech world is getting more and more complex, right? You're going from primary care VBC to specialist care VBC, and that's just the next level of complexity when we're thinking about, how does this value-based payment thing actually work? So the actuaries have a very clear edge in that space, but they can also look to partner with others who have an edge in different areas. So, you know, it could be someone with a technology background, right? Or it could be someone with a sales or business background, a traditional MBA, if you will, to really kind of complement your skill set. That's one thing that I'm, you know, very, very thankful for, to have a partner in this with me, who is sharing that responsibility with me.
That's interesting, because I did another interview with another entrepreneur a couple of weeks ago, and that was sort of the thing that he said as well, that he had a partner that complemented his skills, and that has been part of his journey that's been really very valuable. And I found the same thing with myself. I had a partner who was much better at doing everything that I was no good at doing, which was most things.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and as I'm sure you know, it can be lonely sometimes, right? So running a business by yourself, so having someone that shares the burden, that shares the level of investment that you have, right, in the firm, and shares the responsibility, can also just be tremendously helpful in many ways.
So in closing, I think, what advice would you have for someone who maybe has considered that they would like to try something entrepreneurial, but really doesn't know how to start or how to go about it? What's your advice for somebody like that?
Yeah, maybe now going back to my consulting days, maybe it's three things. One is, don't underestimate the value of the actuarial skill set. I really mean it. I talked to quite a number of VCs and PEs. The skill set is becoming more and more valuable, particularly in health, right? And I think in general, the deep expertise is more and more valuable versus just a generic business skill. So that's number one. I think number two, you also don't necessarily have to start from zero. You don't have to jump off the ship, right? There are many other ways to pursue entrepreneurship, with a step-based approach, right? It could be joining a startup at a, perhaps a more senior role that has responsibilities potentially both in actuarial, but also beyond that, right? It could be doing something that I did. I was looking for companies that already exist to operate versus to go truly to try to go from zero. There are many flavors of this, but the challenge here is that the effort that you're going to have to put into network and understand what opportunity exists, because there isn't a standard playbook out there. And number three, you also don't have to do it alone, right? Find that partner that you trust, whether that person is another actuary or a friend or a colleague from in a different area, to share that burden with you. Now, that's easier said than done. So you got to find someone you trust, but often the hardest thing is to find someone that you're willing to work with, and someone who's willing to bear the same level of risk with you at the same time, right? So I would say it's those three things, but I hope that, I honestly hope that more actuaries pursue the entrepreneurial path, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, right? In the healthcare world that we operate in, I see just a great amount of activity from physician-based entrepreneurs, and they're doing extremely well. And I think there's no reason why actuaries couldn't do the same.
That's great. I guess my biggest takeaway from this, and thank you for doing this, but my biggest takeaway is the endorsement that you've given for the entrepreneurial skill set, the value of the actuarial skill set. I think that's a really good reminder that what we have is valuable and has a lot of application in this space, this entrepreneurial space. So thanks for doing this very much, Sean. Very helpful of you. Love your story. I hope it's helpful to the actuarial community. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you.